Hello everybody and welcome to another video, and today it's going to be a long one. We are looking at the rulebook for Epic Battles Hail Caesar the Punic Wars. Warlord kindly sent this over to me, and I'm going to be using this to play some battles. So what I want to do today is go through the rulebook. I'm not going to go through in mega detail. I am going to skip sections of it because a lot of it is already covered in the main rulebook, and if you know me, I play a lot of Hail Caesar. However, I'm not going to assume that everyone who's watching this video has played Hail Caesar before. The core rules are still the same as in the Hail Caesar main book. However, there are some little things that have changed, but the main thing I want to look at today is how the armies are going to work. So we're going to go through the rulebook. It's going to be quite a long one. I will divide this into chapters, and there'll be timestamps down below, and at the end of the battle, at the end of the video, I've got a combat example just to show how the some of these army specific rules work, in particular with the Roman maniples. So anyway, grab a cup of tea, sit back, and let's have a look. So here we are. Here is the Hail Caesar Punic Wars rulebook. Now, as I said, I'm not going to do a complete flip through. We'll have a look at some of the basic sections in here. If you want to learn how to play Hail Caesar, I've got some learning battle reports. The last battle report, or the first battle report I put up for the Gallic Wars, is in fact a learning battle report. It's at 28mm, but the principles are still the same. So if you want to go and have a look at that, that will give you an idea. However, really, you can watch any of our battle reports and you should be able to quite quickly pick up how the game sort of functions. When we do our first battle report for the Punic Wars, we will be going through things as if it was our first game. That being said, as I go through this, if there's anything that I've noted, I will just bring that out and just speak about it there. Now, if you are a veteran Hail Caesar player, you may just want to skip ahead to the section where we look at changes and special rules and the army lists. Just before we get stuck in as well, though, what I'd like to do is just say a big thank you. There's been a big influx of new subscribers. I imagine it does have something to do with the fact that I am covering the Punic Wars. So if you're new to the channel, thank you very much for joining. I hope you're enjoying the content. And of course, if you're one of my long-term subscribers and or members, cheers for sticking around, and I hope you like it. I must just give a shout out as well to Stu over from Miniature Realms. He's also working on the Punic Wars, and he is doing some fantastic painting tutorials, so go and check those out. I'm not really going to be tackling painting tutorials. I say, if there's interest down the line about the process that I went through to paint all these up quickly, which involves more than find a willing friend, which is a little bit of what I've done, then I may put something out later on. But Stu is definitely your man to go to for some awesome painting tutorials on how to get these little miniatures painted up. So without further ado, let's have a look at the Hail Caesar Epic Battles Punic Wars rulebook. Now, again, the set out of this is broadly the same as the main rulebook, but of course everything in here has been changed to include pictures of the awesome miniatures and counters that you're going to get in that Hannibal set. Everything is in here as you would expect, but I do appreciate that they have gone through and essentially changed all the photos to make them relevant to this set. It would be very easy to just use the images that are already in the rulebook. Everything in here already set out. Now, this is the first thing that I want to take a look at, which is the unit sizes for Epic Battles. Now, these are not hard and fast. If you watch my other battle reports, you know that I play around with unit sizes because ultimately it all comes down to frontage. And as long as the two armies are based the same or to the same convention, you and your opponent, then there's really no problems. So as you can see in here, a large unit of infantry will be 4 bases, a standard is 3, 2 small, and tiny is 1. And there are going to be very, very few occasions that you ever need a tiny unit unless it's scenario specific. Interesting in here, this is actually a correction from my previous video and what I assumed, but elephants are only 1 base as standard. I thought that it was going to be 2. So yeah, 1 base is a unit. Also as well on here, you can see here on the infantry warband, this is where we get our confirmation that a standard unit is 6 bases and is essentially double rank. So if you do want your standard unit of Gauls, you're going to have to paint twice as many. It's going to look awesome, and they're going to hit pretty hard in the game, but yeah, you're going to need 120 of those little dudes on their bases. Everything here is set out pretty much as you would expect, which is the same as the previous rulebook, but they have obviously gone for their specific examples for the Punic Wars. I won't go too much into things about formations. Those are as you'd pretty much expect from the previous versions of the game. One thing about measurements, they essentially say it works well with inches, which is what the standard version of Hail Caesar uses, where infantry moves 6 inches, medium cavalry, and I think it's 9, and then light cavalry go 12. However, they are suggesting that if you want to play sort of slightly differently, you could reduce all measurements by half, so a move becomes 3 inches, or just simply change all of the measurements to centimeters. I think for our first game we'll probably go with inches, and then we'll see how that feels, and maybe we'll switch to centimeters or just half them. The sections on command are pretty much as stated, exactly the same. Here's the good old blunder chart. So if you mess up, your units are going to go floating across the tabletop. This is going to be very handy here, because I feel in this, and we'll come on to this in a moment when we look at how the Manipular Legions rule works. I think group orders are going to be much more of a thing in epic scale. Maybe that's just me. Maybe all the guys who already play epic scale will essentially say, well, duh, of course it will. But the importance of supporting units, especially for Hail Caesar, I think is going to come into its own. All the rules on movement are essentially the same, which is great, and also the rules for moving commanders. The same thing with ranged attacks. I think it's good. They have actually gone through and changed all of the diagrams, so that you're actually getting those 3 bases wide. I know that's the same as what they've done in previous versions of the rules, but I just appreciate it. All your attack modifiers and things about how morale saves work for the game are exactly the same. All the rules for hand-to-hand combat follow exactly the same process as in the standard game. So really, I think what we're going to do, let's get going into the area that's going to be a little bit different. Come on, where are we? Commanders are done. Special orders, there we go. They're all exactly the same. You've got your follow me, your rally. That's the same from the general rulebook. What we do have, though, if we go through the victory and defeat, so special rules. Now, the number of special rules that are in this book differs from the ones that are in this one, which is the core rulebook. Now, I did think when I saw the quick play reference at the back, which is the special rules, that it did look a bit thin. The special rules that are in this book are only the ones that are relevant and in the army lists for this period. So there's a few that are missing. Some of them won't be relevant. So things like crossbows, they're not going to be relevant. However, there are a couple on there which I think you could probably use, such as two-handed weapons, if you wanted to, particularly pick out, a unit as being, like line breakers or something. So just be aware. You can find out the other rules easy enough, but this list here is only specific to the Punic Wars. There are other rules that are on there, and I think the list is actually pretty much twice as long as it is there. So moving on from the special rules, we have the stuff about terrain. That's all basically standard. Lovely picture there. I do appreciate that. Gives you an idea of what you're going to be playing. Okay, so here's where things really start to change, which is the battle section. It goes through essentially how to choose forces, how to play a game. Now, the way that they're going to suggest to play forces is either agreeing on a scenario or a set list, or if you want to use points, and I appreciate some people who are going to be coming into this from other games that rely on points values are going to want to do that if you want to play what's considered an even game. I personally don't really use points values. I just like coming up with scenarios and forces, but it's nice to see, and you'll see it in a minute, the inclusion of points values and upgrades for the units as well. We kind of use a homebrew system for the other periods which aren't serviced by expansions at the moment, but I'll probably for the first couple of battles we'll use the army list and use the points values that are on there. The table size it's recommended is 6x4 or 8x4. That's pretty much what I use anyway. And what's quite neat in here is there's a couple of optional alternatives in the way to do orders, including this one here, which is a free order, and it's basically suggested that when playing a one-on-one game, because terrible dice rolling happens all the time, and if you fail a command roll from one of your commanders, his whole division usually can't move, or what hasn't yet received an order can't move, I should probably say. However, what they suggest in here, if the first order is failed, then just say it is obeyed anyway, and you get to carry on moving. That way you always get to move one unit. But as you will see in a minute, some of the special rules that the Romans have in particular is going to mean that that's not necessary anyway. It goes through setting up a game, and these 3 scenarios that you get in here, encounter battle, approach battle, and meeting engagement, they are the same as the ones in the standard rulebook. So there's just 3 standard scenarios just to get you going. Now, here we are. We are on to the thing that I really wanted to take a look at, which is the army lists. So in here, it basically tells you about the objectives of the list, the fighting qualities, and how to read the army composition. So what I want to do is look at the Romans, and then we'll take a look at the Carthaginians, and then we'll get on and we'll look at a combat example showing some of the new rules that are in here. So the Republican Roman army is quite nice. It gives you quite a nice summary here of the maniple legions and how they work, with a nice little diagram to show that. And then it's going to go on to basically give you some of the history, a few sidebars on some of the generals, and then we get into this bit here, which is the manipular rule. Now, as written, the manipular special rule gives access to the following 2 abilities. So 1 rule, 2 abilities. Manipular support. Units of Hastati may be supported by units of Principe or Triarii positioned diagonally behind them, and vice versa for all the Triarii and other Principe. A unit may benefit from both manipular supports and regular supports, but never may be supported by more than 3 units in a single combat. I'll just illustrate that with the units I've got here, so just in case you're not a Hail Caesar player and you're looking at this new, you'll see what I mean. So in standard Hail Caesar, you would basically have your unit here. So here are some Hastati. So if these Hastati are facing off against this unit of Libyan spearmen here, that would be a standard matchup. Now, if in standard Hail Caesar, if there is a unit to the rear of the Hastati or directly on the flanks like this, then they can lend dice to the attack. They add their lower of the 2 values, it's their short range value, to the attack. So in this example here, these Hastati would get 5 dice, and then they would receive 2 dice from this unit, 2 dice from this unit, and 2 dice from this unit. This is how it would work as standard. However, if you have the manipular special rule, you can receive support from units that are placed diagonally. So if you had this situation, all of these units would still count as supporting. You have the one that's in the standard position to support, and then these 2 diagonally. It also means that you could do something like this. So if there is terrain affecting you, if you've got something like trees here, and the unit can't move, then all 3 of these units would still offer support, which I think is quite neat, and it shows how versatile the Roman cohorts, or the maniples rather, actually are. Now, the second part of the manipular legions rule essentially says that on a successful order, a unit that is in combat may switch places with a unit that is placed diagonally behind it. So in this situation here, let's say the Hastati here have a few casualties on them. They are not disordered, and they're not shaken or anything like that. A commander can just give them an order, and they would swap places with this unit. So if this unit is fresh, you can put them into the fight. Now, importantly, this unit cannot now support, but this unit counters charging. These 2 units would still offer support because they haven't moved. So I think this is going to lead to some really interesting tactical situations, and there will be quite a lot of support going on. The Romans are acting in small units, and you'll see that in a minute when we have a look at the army lists. So you are going to want to support them. If we have this kind of thing happening, this unit's dead. That they're going to get smashed by a full standard unit of Libyan spearmen. These guys are heavy infantry. They've got 7-8 attacks. These guys have only got 5 attacks and a stamina of 4. As soon as you start pumping in supports like this, things get a little bit more interesting, because you could just receive a little bit of damage. You switch in the fresh unit, and you're going to be getting that charging bonus each time. So that is potentially going to be really, really interesting in games. Hopefully I explained that okay, and that all made sense. The big thing, as I said in the example there, is if a unit is disordered, it cannot receive orders of any kind. And if you're disordered in close combat, you stay disordered. So you're going to want to get your Hastati or your Triari, you're going to want to get them out of there before that happens. So it might be if they take a couple of hits and they pass their break test, rather than risk keeping them in there again and risk another break test and they become disordered, get them out of there, because otherwise you won't be able to do that manipula swap. The next section in here is looking at Roman commanders of legend. So we have Scipio Africanus, we have Scipio the Elder, we have Varro here, which is quite nice. Now they give these guys individual points values and leadership ratings. Now in Hail Caesar, a standard leadership rating would be 8. As you can see here, Scipio is a 10. And what's quite nice here, and this doesn't always happen in the expansions, they've given them all some special rules. So here we have Inspiring Orator, and Scipio's division will all units in there increase their stamina by 1. That's going to be really, really helpful for those maniples, because they're only going to have a stamina of 4 normally. So pumping that up to a 5 could make a fairly big difference, especially when you consider a standard unit has a stamina of 6. I quite like this one here, Tactical Diversity. Essentially, as the as the game goes on, supporting units get to add additional attacks, which I think is pretty cool. Now, all of these commanders have these little rules, but there was nothing to stop you borrowing these if you were playing a game and you just wanted to, make your commander look a little bit better. What is quite nice is when you take your commanders, you can use this table if you want to, be a little bit, keep things interesting. You can roll a dice to see how basically good that person is. So on a 1 or a 2, they have a leadership of 7. 3 or 4, 8, or 5 or 6, it goes up to a 9. That can be risky because you might end up with a complete dolt in charge of your army. And if it's me, that would certainly be the case. So here are the Republican Roman units and their fighting qualities. Now, this is one of the things I was most interested in seeing, particularly because I wanted to see what rules they would give the Romans. This might be the same in the other Epic releases, I don't know, but quite handily, it lists how many bases there are. Roman Hastati or Principe heavy infantry have a clash of 5, a sustained value of 5, a short range of 2, a long range of 0, and a morale save of 4+, which is standard for heavy infantry. That's going to be pretty brutal, to be honest. They've got the drilled and manipula special rules as standard. Now, manipula we've just been through. Drilled essentially means that even if this is what I was talking about earlier about potentially failed orders, if the unit fails an order, and they've got the drilled special rule, they still execute one part of that order. So they'll always do a little bit. So it's a very, very handy rule to have, especially if you do a group order on your troops. They will still do a bit of that move, so you're not going to get caught out as say the Carthaginians might if they fail. The other thing that drill does is it lets you move through friendly units without a risk of disorder. So again, playing on that idea of the Romans being well drilled, and they can swap around quite easily. Now there are some nice little bonuses in here that you can give them. You can make the Hastati tough fighters for +1 point. Now I can't really see a reason to not make them tough fighters. Tough fighters lets you re-roll 1 dice from your attack. So if you're rolling 5 dice hitting on 3s, if you charge, there's a good chance that, a lot of those are going to come up. Why would you not re-roll it? I think for a point, that's bloody good, and I can't really see a reason that you wouldn't do it. It's not like saving that 1 point is really going to let you pick up another unit unless you have unless you do it 23 times. You can make the Principe stubborn. Stubborn's good because it lets you re-roll saves. I like how they're trying to differentiate the units based on the special rules, and that's how it generally works in Hail Caesar. You don't really muck around with these statistics here. Those are kind of set. So small units of heavy infantry always have a clash of 5 and a sustained of 5. That's just standard across Hail Caesar. How you add flavor to your units is in the special rules, who has tough fighter and who has stubborn. What I quite like in here is that you can essentially downgrade Hastati and Principe to Levy. Now Levy can really mess you up. Essentially Levy means that when you become disordered, you have to actually roll to get out of disorder. What normally happens is if a unit is disordered, it becomes undisordered, or it regains its order rather at the end of your turn, or the end of your next turn. So if it's disordered in your own turn, at the end of that turn it becomes regains its order. If you're disordered in the enemy turn, you would have to wait until the end of your next turn before they regain their order. As you can see here, you can see that the Hastati are armed with the Pila. Now, I wonder if... Is Pila on here? See, Pilam is on here. Enemy suffers -1 morale save in the first round of combat, but it's not actually listed under their special rules. So I would assume that you would give that to them, but it's not actually listed. So I guess that would be something that you guys would have to decide when you're playing the game. Here you can see with Triarii, who are just born again hard. They have the drilled elite rule. Elite essentially lets you roll to recover from disorder at the start of your turn, whereas levy means that you have to roll to see if you recover when you would normally recover at the end of the turn. So elite troops are always going to recover. It's just you could recover a little bit quicker. They've got the manipular rule and the stubborn rule, and then you could also give them valiant. Now valiant lets you re-roll your first failed break test. So the first time they're going to leg it, you could just re-roll that. So the Triarii are pretty brutal. As we go down, you can see you've got allied Latin Hastati, allied like Triarii. We've got the Velitates in here, which is, again, you can give them tough fighters. So you could try and get the Velitate skirmishers into close combat. They're not great, but as a last resort, you could throw them in. And of course, here we have Italian light cavalry, we have a ballista, and we have some Roman sort of medium cavalry, which would be these guys. So these guys here, they're gonna hit pretty hard with 6 dice, but again, they're only a 2 base unit. If you look down this list here, all of the Roman units, with the exception of the ballista, are fielded as small units, which is in contrast to the Carthaginian army, who essentially everything is standard. Now, the Roman army composition, each of your divisions must contain at least 4 units, excluding skirmishers, and must have a commander. At least 3/4 of the units in the whole army must be infantry, other than skirmishers, and together manipular units must make up at least half of the number of non-skirmish infantry in the army. Now, interestingly here, this is something which... well, it's going to, basically affect what you're painting. The number of units Hastati, Principe, and Triarii in the army must be the same. And a division, not an army, a division, must contain equal number of units of Hastati, Principe, and Triarii. And you've got to have at least 4 units in a division. So at its very base, let me just illustrate this. Okay, so at the very sort of basic level, here is a Roman commander. There's a consul there, and he is raising his division. So we are going to start with a small unit of Hastati. Now I have to have equal numbers of units. We'll take a small unit of Principe, and then we're going to have to take a small unit of Triarii. Now, forgive me, I'm working on Hastati and Principe mainly at the minute, so I've got 1 base of Triarii here, and I'm just going to use a 2nd base of Principe. So Hastati, Principe, Triarii. So there's the 3, because you have to have equal numbers. If you then decided you wanted to put in another unit of Hastati, you would have to put in another unit of Principe and another unit of Triarii. So it's trying to force you into that maniple system, or that way of thinking. A way around this would just be to field some cavalry. So if I grab, hang on, here we go. Here's some Roman medium cavalry, and I'll just borrow a base of Carthaginians, because again, I'm working on infantry mainly at the minute. That would be essentially a very small basic division. That would be it. That's the sort of the smallest that you could do. It doesn't have to be these guys. It could be light cavalry, or it could be a ballista, but there are some rules around the ballistas as well. So really it's a case of, are you going to be fielding 4 units as a minimum, or are you going to be fielding 6 units? I think a lot of people will probably be going for 2 units of Hastati, 2 units of Principe, and 2 units of Triarii. Remember as well that if you don't do a group order, if I was just ordering these guys and they get to there, and then I order these guys and they fail, none of these are moving. None of these guys are moving unless they've got the drilled rule, which, these guys do. So these guys would actually move. So that's probably crap. But if you've got another 3 units here, you're just going to want to give them a group order, because even if they fail, they will then still move a little bit. You've got your allied Latin manipular units. They can't be in the same division as Roman manipular units. So, and you can only have one division containing allied Latin manipular units. You get some penal legionaries. That's quite fun. And then allied troops. Now, a big part of the Roman army was allied, but essentially it's the army list that's over in the Carthaginian side, and they can't be in the same divisions as regular Republican units. So you could have, for example, 3 divisions of manipular units and then just have your allied division on the side. Goes down here, light cavalry, at least a quarter of the cavalry units in the army must be light cavalry. Divisions may contain up to half as many skirmishing units as they contain non-skirmishing infantry, and skirmishes up to 100% of the points spent have to be velitate, so that you can only have the number of points spent on skirmishes must not exceed the number of points spent on velitate. So you would never be able to, for example, take like loads of Numidian horsemen or Numidian skirmishers, or at least more than the velitates. And then finally, you can only field ballistas if all players agree. There must be at least 3 Roman Hastati units in the army for every ballista fielded. So that's pretty cool, and I think that the Roman list does give a lot of flavour. I'm going to be interested to see how that works on the table by sort of forcing you down these routes and how you've got to pick. But hey, that's how the Romans worked. The Carthaginian army list, again, set out very, very similarly. Now, they've got a really interesting special rule, which is his motivated mercenaries, which gives +1 to the clash value of anyone with that rule when fighting Romans in their first combat of the game. So not the charge, not the first round, but the whole first combat. That could be pretty brutal on the charge. You've got the same thing here with Hannibal and Hasdrubal and Mago. Again, you've got all these nice little rules to really bring some flavour to your armies. Now we look at the composition of the Carthaginian army, and as you notice here, the Carthaginian army list is rather small because they relied heavily on allies, which we come to in a little bit. So if we go down here, we can see that the Libyan heavy infantry, that's these guys here, they are heavy infantry, 3 bases as standard, clash 7, sustain 7, short of 3, 4+ morale save, and a stamina of 6. They have that motivated mercenary special rule, and if you're not upgrading them to veterans, which I'll talk about in just a second, they get the elite rule, the phalanx rule, and tough fighters. That's loads. That's loads. They are going to be brutal. I was going to bring up in this that I hadn't seen anything about the Sacred Band, which was essentially the elite of the elite in the Carthaginian army. I'm assuming that is essentially the upgrade to let that happen. I can't see a limit on that. But then I guess that, you know, because if you are playing with points, that's not going to happen too much. If you're not playing with points, you'll just have to agree with your opponent. So just give it an idea. These motivated mercenaries rule gives them +1 to their clash value on the first round. Was it just clash, or was it sustain? No, it's just clash. So it is only going to be for the first round of combat. So for the first round of combat, these guys are going to get an 8 on their clash value. The phalanx rule is quite nasty, if I remember correctly as well. Hand-to-hand combat defeats by up to 2 casualties are treated as a draw. So these guys are going to be really hard to actually move off the table. Of course, then as well, you can see tough fighters, they get to reroll 1 dice. Citizen levy, they're essentially a medium infantry, so slightly less good than the Libyan heavy infantry. You also got the Libby-Phoenician medium cavalry, who are essentially the same as the Romans. And of course, you've got the elephants, who on their own don't look great, but they have a nice little rule here, which you can see with the elephants. Defeated enemies reroll 1 dice for break tests. Open order opponents get +1 to hit elephants, giving ground stampede. Elephants giving ground stampede on a roll of a 1. Elephants cannot support cavalry. Cavalry charging elephants use their charge bonuses and risk disorder, and they get a free move along a road or as part of a marching column. One of the key things in this are the differences between this and Black Powder. Now, if you've played Epic Black Powder, or you've played Epic Pike Shot, or just Black Powder, there are differences in this, and one of the key ones is to do with how break tests work. Units aren't automatically disordered on a roll of 6 in shooting like they are in Black Powder or in Pike and Shot. If you roll a 6, the unit has to take a break test. Now, there's a much more variable result here. So you can see here, you could retreat disordered, you could hold your ground around disordered or retreating good order, or if you're really unlucky and you roll 2, you roll a double 1, they're off the board. So it is possible to get rid of them, people, by shooting without even really killing anyone. It could just represent a leader just getting killed, or they're just terrified of everything that's hit them. So you have got to take that into consideration, and that's sort of where the elephant comes into play, because it's going to force quite a bit of disorder. As we can see on the Carthaginian army, like the Romans, you need to have 4 units in a division to make it playable, and 66% of that must be non-skirmishing infantry. Up to 25% of the infantry in the army may be Libyan heavy infantry, so you can't give them any more than that. And then up to 25% of maybe citizen levies. Of course, allied troops are all available here, and I don't think there's any restrictions on them. There's a few restrictions on skirmishers. Here we are. Here we have the allied troops. So as you can see, just rolling through those, we have the different types. Now, quite interesting, some of them got the amalgamated soldiers rule. That's really nice. That essentially just lets you pick one of these special rules: brave, eager, feigned flight, freshly raised, or tough fighters, and you can apply it to that unit. So you can end up with quite a diverse force, which is going to be very, very different from the Romans. So here we can see allied Italian medium infantry. So again, these are all fairly standard, and you can add different points or take away points to make them levies, give them motivated mercenaries. So interestingly, these guys don't come with the motivated mercenaries. That's pretty much down everything in the Carthaginian list just there. This is the one I was looking for, the Spanish Scutari. That's these guys here with the funky shields and the swords. Now, there was a lot of them in Hannibal's army. These guys are medium infantry. You can give them elite, but basically they're fairly standard. There's not a lot, like nothing really special for them, but you can make a couple of them elite. You've got the Spanish light infantry, which I'm painting up at the minute, Illyrians, and oh, here we go. Here's the Gallic warbands. Now the Gallic warbands get 9 dice as standard on the clash, which is pretty brutal. They also have the Wild Fighters rule. Now, for those of you who don't play a lot of Hail Caesar, Wild Fighters is one of those rules that just it can really catch you unawares. Essentially, it lets you re-roll not just 1 dice, but all of the misses in the first round of combat, and you've got 9 of those coming in. Now, imagine that they are oh no, because they're warbands, so they won't be supported. Anyway, ignore that. Okay, so let's have a go at building a small Carthaginian division, or just sort of the minimum you could get away with. Here is the Carthaginian commander. I think we'll chuck in 2 units of the Libyan heavy infantry, because they are maddeningly good. Let's chuck in a unit of the Spanish Scutari, and then what else was in there? Skirmishing units don't count towards the number of units in there. So if we chuck in a skirmish unit of Numidian allies there, and then we'd need 1 more unit to make the thing whole. So I tell you what, why don't we just chuck in some elephants? So that would be quite tactically interesting. What you could do, of course, is you could play around with things. You could add some cavalry in, although I quite fancy the idea of just having some cavalry divisions. If you wanted to bulk this out a little bit more, you could add in some more Scutari here just to support things. But yeah, there we go. That is a Carthaginian division. So let's get back to the book. In the book, you got some nice example armies in here with lots and lots of units. And so for those of you who aren't used to sort of building armies in Hail Caesar, you could just follow these. And to be fair, if you just wanted to, if you can't be bothered to kind of figure out your own list, it's quite nice to have this kind of thing done for you. Then we get into a whole section on the Punic Wars, basically listing some battles, and you could basically just play through these. It basically gives you a nice history to read, and then as you go through this, which I think is really, really nice, you come across battles that you can play. Like here's the Battle of the River Trebia, which is where the Romans got essentially soaked crossing a river and then fought a whole load of elephants and the freezing cold. It then comes on to the Battle of Lake Tresemme. You look at Rome's darkest hour at Cannae. And you basically can play through the whole Punic Wars, reading the history and then playing the battles, which I think is pretty cool, to be honest. And I like that. That's the whole of essentially the last sort of section of the book. And then at the very back of the book, like in the standard edition, you have your quick reference sheet. So here's your everything to do with ranged attacks, including the break test table for ranged attacks, a break test table for hand-to-hand combat, and some special rules. And there we go. So that's a look at the rulebook, but I want to see how this manipula rule is going to work. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set up a small combat example using some of these manipula units against some of those just brutal Libyan spearmen. And let's just have a play and just see what happens. Okay, so here we are. I've set up this quick combat example so that we can play through a turn and just see how these rules are going to work. What we have, or what we're going to say here, is this Roman division, or what's left of a Roman division, has charged into that unit of Libyan spearmen. At the front, we have this unit of Hastati, behind them another unit of Hastati, and then we have this unit of Principe. Now, both these units are going to be in support of our front unit there. The Libyan infantry have received the charge, and behind them, but not in support, is a unit of Iberian Scutari, who, if they basically survive this round, may be able to get into combat to help support. So let's see how this works. I'm just going to use the statistics as written in the book without any of the upgrades. So let's work out what dice they're going to get. Okay, so in the example you can see in front, the unit of Hastati that is in contact with the Libyans is going to get 5 dice because of its clash value. Each of the supporting units is going to contribute 2 dice for their support value, or short value, sorry, on their statistics. Now, the Libyans normally have a clash of 7. However, they have that, eager mercenary, motivated mercenaries rule, which gives them +1 dice on the clash. So for this round, they are going to have 8 dice, but they have nothing in support. So 9 dice for the Romans, and we have 8 dice for the Carthaginians. Now, it's important to say that if any of these supporting units had special rules, such as tough fighters, you need to roll the dice separately because they will affect them. So you have re-rolls, you get those re-rolls on the dice pools effectively for each unit. Now, the important thing to remember here is the charge bonus only affects the front unit. So these 5 dice are hitting on 3s, these dice are hitting on 4s, and these dice over here are hitting on 4s. Okay, so let's see how they do. Let's start with the Romans. So with these dice hitting on 3s. Okay, so looking for 3s here. Right, there's no rerolls, they haven't got tough fighters or anything, so there we go. They got 4 hits. Then both of these supports, even though they haven't got tough fighters or anything, they are hitting on 4s. There we go. The Romans got a total of 7 hits on the Carthaginians. Let's see what the Carthaginians are going to do back. So the Carthaginians have 8 attacks, they're hitting on 4s. That's really bad. Probably not the best, since my dice rolling is terrible. So they got 4 hits. So the Roman Hastati at the front have taken 4 hits. So now we need to roll saves. So the Carthaginians have a save of 4, a morale save, and they need 7 of these. Okay, they save 5 of those, so they have taken 2 casualties. The Romans need 4 saves of 4 as well, because they're also heavy infantry. Oh dear, okay, so the Romans took 3 casualties and saved 1. So the Romans have actually lost that combat by 1. Okay, so as we can see here, the Roman unit at the front has taken 3 casualties. They have a stamina of 4 before they become shaken, and the Libyans have taken 2 casualties. Now they have a stamina of 6, so it's not looking good for the Romans. The Romans need to take a break test, as the difference between casualties is 1, they are 2d6 minus 1. Okay, so that's the best thing that the Romans could get. -1 is obviously 11, so the combat would just roll on. Let's move into the Carthaginian player's turn and see if they can sort of tip the scales a little bit. Okay, so it's now the Carthaginian player's turn, and he's moved his Iberian Scutari into support. Now, they add 3 dice when they are in support. The Romans are still rolling exactly the same number, but now it's the second round of combat. These Carthaginians aren't going to get that bonus attack. So let's see how many dice they get. We'll roll the Carthaginians first because it's their turn. So they get 7 dice for the heavy infantry and 3 dice for the support. So they're rolling 10 dice. They won the last round of combat, so they're hitting on 3s. The Romans are going to get their 9 dice again, this time hitting on 4s. Carthaginians are hitting on 3s. That's not great. They got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so half the attacks again. The Romans are rolling 9 dice. Now, as everyone still needs the same value to hit and there's no special rules, we might as well roll them all together. They're looking for 4s. And we got 5. So more hits from the Romans. The Carthaginians are going to need 5 saves of 4. Okay, so the Carthaginians took 3 casualties. They're not shaken. Okay, so those casualties have been added. Now the Romans needed 5 saves this time. So 5 saves of 4. There we go. Okay, so the Romans saved every single one. That means that the Romans have won the combat by 3. So the Carthaginians are taking a break test, 2d6 minus 3. Okay, so 10 minus 3 is 7. That result is still hold and fight on. But now the initiative is back with the Romans. And now it's the Roman player's turn. And he's got this quite closely bedraggled unit at the front. I think he's going to try and swap them out. So we're going to try and use that manipula rule. So on the Roman player's turn, the Roman commander is going to basically order this unit of Hastati to swap with this unit here of Principe. So he just needs to pass a normal order. Let's just say that he hasn't got anyone else to order and everything is going well. 8 or less, and they swap over. There we go, a 6. So now those 2 units will swap. Importantly, this unit will take all its casualties with it. This unit moves in and counts as charging. This unit here cannot support. So now we're going to do the combat. Now, those Principe will get 5 attacks, and they count as charging. So this time we've got 5 attacks hitting on 3, but only this unit can support. This unit can't support because it's swapped out. So the Romans are going to have 7 attacks overall. The Carthaginians are going to be in the same situation as before, where they are going to have 10 attacks, this time hitting on 4s. Okay, let's sort out the Romans. So here we go, the Principe hitting on 3s. That's 4 hits. And the supporting Hastati hit on 4s. That's misses. So 4 hits on the Carthaginians. Now the Carthaginians are hitting on 4s. That's 5 as well. Now, of course, this is taking place over many turns. You don't go backwards and forwards like this unless you have sort of a sweeping advance, which is done by cavalry. So the Carthaginians need 4 saves of 4. Okay, so the Carthaginians have taken 3 casualties in that combat, which is enough to shake them. Now the Romans need to take 5 saves of 4. And they've taken 2 casualties to that unit of Principe. So before we work out the break test results, because the Carthaginians have got casualties in excess, so they've taken 6, 7, 8. Because they got 2 in excess of their stamina, because their stamina is normally 6, these 2 casualties go on to a supporting unit. So they go on to the Iberian Scutari there, and they lost the combat by 1 overall. They took 3 casualties, they took 2, so it's 2d6 minus 1 for the Carthaginians. 2d6 minus 1. That is a 5 for the Carthaginians, which I believe means they will be retreating. Just hang on a second. Yes, infantry in close combat will give ground disordered together with their supports. So when you give ground, it's different to retreating. Give ground is always 6 inches. So basically the supports, we'll just say, for example, they'll go back to there, like that. These guys will go back to here. Now, the Romans would have a choice. They could do which is like a victor's move, which is follow up and maintain contact. So they could do that, and the supports would do the same. Or the Romans could choose to just stand their ground and lick their wounds. But I think the manipulator system is going to be very interesting. You don't have a lot of casualties to play around with before the option would be taken away from you, because they'd be shaken or they would potentially be disordered. And the other thing is as well, as these are small units, if you do take a whacking load of excess casualties, those casualties are going to get spread among the supporting units. But I think it worked well. But anyway, there you go. There's just a little bit of Hail Caesar combat for you. I'm sure most of you know how to play Hail Caesar, but just in case anyone was sort of wondering how combat works, that's essentially it. Once you start adding in rerolls and the special rules, things can get really, really interesting. And of course, you could throw the commanders into the combats as well. But there we go. Well, let's get back to the book. Right, so there we go. Thank you for sticking with this probably rather long video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that's kind of cleared up maybe some of the questions that people had regarding the rules and what we're going to be looking at when we start playing these games of epic Punic Wars. If you've got any questions, or if there's anything that I haven't explained very well and you want clarifying, just drop a comment down below and I will do my best to answer. Anyway, guys, do just stick around. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you all again in the next one. Take care of yourselves. Bye bye.